Are you in a position where you're defined by your age, and that's limiting you to pursue a dream or goal you want to accomplish? The More Than Your Age podcast is about having conversations with women who fully live their lives without being dictated or defined by their age. This is a space to encourage women who feel blocked to pursue a dream or goal based on their life circumstances. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast. I am your host, Erica Pasbar. Let's start living life fully and become more than your age. Last week, I shared that October is both Domestic Violence and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. 3 episodes this month will feature guests who are either survivors of domestic violence or breast cancer. These are some very serious topics, and I want to preface again that if you are in a situation where domestic violence is present, please seek help. You do not need to be going through this alone. With that being said, our lives don't always go as planned, but sometimes God leads us exactly where we need to be, regardless of what happened to us. On today's episode, I'm talking with Tina Keller, a woman who walked away from an abusive marriage, raised her kids as a single mom, and started law school at 45, and then changed her entire life by 50. Her journey wasn't easy, but she still found a way to make it work. What made her take that leap, and what kept her going when everything seemed stacked against her? Stick around to hear Tina's story of starting over no matter where you are in life. And this episode might just inspire you to take your next step. Enjoy the show. Joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast is attorney and author Tina Keller. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Tina, I am so thankful to have you here and to really hear more of your story. But before we get started, I do want you to share, would you share how old you were when you started and then when you graduated law school?
Okay. So when I started really hearing from the Lord, because I never wanted to be an attorney. This was not my idea. This was a God idea. And I was 45. So I still had to do, study for the LSAT and apply and get accepted. 45 was when I began that journey. So I went to a part-time evening program and graduated in 2019. I actually graduated and turned 50 the same week in May of 2019. So I was 50 when I graduated, and now I'm 55.
I just love that. I love it. I can't wait to hear more. So we are going to go back to hearing that story and how you became a lawyer, quote unquote, later in life. But before we do that, I do want to kind of know what just happened to get you that led up to that point where you said you heard from the Lord that, hey, this is something you're going to pursue when you really never thought that you were going to pursue that. And so you shared with me that you grew up watching domestic violence. And so what did that look like for you, and what did you witness specifically?
Right. So I feel like I was in 2 abusive households. My parents fought a lot, screaming, throwing things. They weren't really physically abusive, but at a certain point, I think I was in junior high, my mom just kind of shut down and decided she wasn't going to fight with dad anymore. So he kind of turned his wrath towards me. A lot of emotional and psychological abuse. And then my grandparents which I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up, and they were both alcoholics, and they were very physically violent with each other. I remember getting in a fight with my mom one day. I was early teens, and I ended up leaving the house. I couldn't drive, so I literally walked 5 miles to my grandparents' house and get there, and they are in a knockdown, drag out fight, like punching each other, and there was a long hallway, and there was blood all over the walls. So I actually ended up having to call my dad to come pick me up because I didn't feel like walking 5 miles back home that day. So that was a really, really good day to lay the foundation of, I literally was in two households where fighting and abuse was happening.
When like at that age, when when you're growing up and you're witnessing from not just your parents but your grandparents as well, did you just think that that's normal, that that's how people behave, or reflecting, looking back, how would you say that that kind of affected you at that specific time?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do. We think it's normal, right? But I also, really, I think started forming ideas in my head that, when I get married, I am not going to stand for this, you know? So going, meeting my husband when we were dating, told him, if you ever hit me, we'll leave you, and I stood firm on that.
Did Just based on the things that you witnessed to outside of, what what you told your husband that, you would never stand for that. How did that affect you as a teenager and a young adult, just in other relationships with work or your peers, anything like that?
Yeah, so it is hard. I'm an introvert, right? So I actually think I used that as an excuse to isolate myself and not really form deep relationships. It took a long time to get to the place where I could trust anybody, you know? So it really does shape you as you're growing up and seeing that. Number one, you feel like it's normal, and if, and you build walls to protect yourself, you
Yeah.
know.
And for you, was even an option to like see a counselor or seek help? Was that something that was possible or crossed your mind? Or was that something that just, you just kind of deal with it and you move on?
Yeah, I just dealt with it and moved on. So funny, not funny story. My mom was a counselor. And so she was very abusive and not, and she was in counseling. And I just saw that counseling didn't solve anything, right? Growing up. So I never really pursued that. Actually, one point in time, years ago, while I was still married, actually, wanted to go to school to become a counselor myself. And then actually gave my life to the Lord while I was going through my divorce. And at the time, I was in school to become a counselor and giving my life to the Lord and learning about the Bible and God, kind of compared that to my psychology classes. And I'm like, the thought of becoming a counselor at that point just made me ill,
Yeah.
honestly. And that's just my story. I know counseling works for a whole lot of people, so I'm not saying anything negative about counseling in and of itself. But for me, that was my journey.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense too if you had experience of what it was like growing up, and then you had family that were your mom was a counselor, and
Yeah.
having that kind of having to decide between the two, that, I mean, it kind of makes sense
Yeah.
seeing that.
Yeah.
Well, you also said too, you would, when you would get married, you would not stand for physical abuse at all. And you shared too that you realized later that you were in an abusive marriage, and then you decided to leave that. So what were the signs that you saw in that marriage that indicated that you knew you needed to leave?
Right. So he was not physically violent our entire marriage. Towards the end, we were married 7 years. Towards the end, he started like getting in my face and screaming at me and towering over me and intimidating me. He started pushing me around a little bit, or blocking the door so I couldn't leave the room if we were arguing. So the beginnings of physical violence were manifesting, and I saw it coming like a freight train, you know. So I went and retained an attorney, had her on standby. I wanted to try and work things out, but I knew it was just a matter of time. So that, him starting to push me around and see those signs of physical violence starting to manifest. But really the big thing that happened, and I had already retained the attorney at this time, I was begging him to go marriage counseling, even though what I just said about counseling,
Yeah.
see if we could work on our marriage. And he told me, Tina, I don't have any problems in this marriage. Any issues we have are your fault. And I was like, there's no way to come back from that, you know? So
Yeah.
we did end up going to see a Catholic priest. My aunt connected us with this Catholic priest, and he sat down with both of us, and then he met with my ex-husband, and then he met with me individually. And he told me in that session, Tina, I'm a Catholic priest. I can't tell you to get divorced, but you need to get away from this man.
Wow.
And it was like, after my ex saying that all the problems in our marriage were my fault, and then I have this Catholic priest telling me, you need to get out, girl. I was like, then I went and filed for divorce.
Wow. So, okay. So when all this happened too, I know that you have a business financial management and education background, and you stated too that you tried the counseling and then stopped doing that. And so in the middle of all of this, did you have a career at the same time, or kind of what was going on in with life for you at that specific time frame?
Yeah. So when I filed for divorce and I left him, that was 2001. So there really weren't in my area any agencies to help, any advocates. So a female police officer really was my only advocate. I won't get into how upset I am looking back with my attorney. She was no support at all. So I was a stay-at-home mom, so when I left, I did not have a job. I got blessed with a friend who connected me to a really decent job at the time. I became an office manager in a steel plant, and I worked there for several years. So yeah, it was being a stay-at-home mom to having to go out and work full time. So yeah, and then going to school on top of it for
Wait.
I finished up my financial management degree, and then I went and got the education degree, middle school education. So that was all at the same time. Plus I gave my life to the Lord during that time too.
Yeah.
So which is probably the only thing that got me through any of it.
I believe that. Now, okay, that is a
Mm-hmm.
lot. I was gonna say, so you're had to make this huge shift of
Yes.
you're married and then you're staying home with your kids, and potentially we're planning to do that for maybe several more years. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
And then
because
now
my
there's this
youngest
big
was in preschool. Yeah.
wow. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
so you mentioned too at the same time you found the Lord. So in that time when everything is just and life is drastically changing, was learning to follow him. How did following him help you get through the day to day? I know that's kind of a broad overview,
Yeah.
but whatever you can remember from that time, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So, I got radically saved, and then so I was just hungry for everything of the Lord, the Bible, finding out what why God put me on this earth, why I'm going through this stuff. I was actually at a prayer meeting. Our provisional orders for our divorce were pretty rough. So he actually had custody. And basically at the beginning, I had to go be his babysitter. And then when he came home from work, I had to leave. It was horrible. It was just horrible. Plus, I had to go find a job, right? So it was just crazy. So I went to a prayer meeting, and, he had custody of the kids. So I was just crying out to him, God, I want my babies back. That was so devastating. And I just heard him say clearly, Tina, I want my babies back too.
Oh,
Right? And I'm like, okay, how do we get your babies back, God? And I really felt like he was saying to go to school to become a teacher. So it was like, again, not something I had planned to do. I really felt like he said to do that. I'm like, okay, Lord, you're going to have to get me in. You're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to get me through it, and he did. And he did. So I honestly believe, my relationship with him and really pressing into, a relationship with him and seeking his will is the only thing that got me through that time period.
a lot of times when people, whether they have a faith in God or they don't, when they are in like their lowest of lows, it's
Yeah.
really easy to shake your fist at God. God, why do you let this happen? Why would you allow this to happen? But in
Right.
your situation, it really drew you closer to him. Why do you think that was the
Yes.
case?
Yeah. Well, I think in that moment when I was just crying out for my babies and I hear him say, I want my babies back too, and the picture of that is, all the lost in the world, not just my three little boys, but so many millions of people around the world. It just made my problem seem so much smaller and insignificant. Right. And my heart was like, wow, let me help you get your babies back, you know? So, and then I knew just instinctively that if I did that, he would help me get mine back. And he did, you know?
You said too that finances were worrisome and you didn't know how that was going to happen, but God provided. I'd love to hear what were some of the ways that he provided to help you get through school during this situation.
Yeah, well, I got financial aid and student loans. So there was that. I was unemployed a little bit during that time, which actually freed up my time, and I had student loans and unemployment money. So did I live on the system for a while? Yeah, I did. But I was determined not to stay there also. I think the welfare system is good for people who just need to help getting back on their feet. So, and that's how I viewed that. So, but I have to tell you about one Christmas, because when the kids were all little, I literally had no money for Christmas. Like, there was not going to be Christmas. I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent. I didn't know how I was going to keep the electricity on. I wasn't getting any child support at the time. Well, ever. My oldest son was not my husband's. And I don't know if you know, but there was a big scandal in Cincinnati with the child support division. So I had outstanding child support that I had never gotten. So I got like a $2,000 check because they had cleared that up. Yeah, I had written that off long ago. So I get a $2,000 check in the mail, which paid all my bills, right? And then the church that I was going to, a bunch of the families got together and bought me and the kids all Christmas presents that year.
Wow.
So I had presents galore under the tree. That was the year that Santa Claus died, because I was not going to give Santa Claus the glory for that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's just, one Christmas in particular, but he's been faithful my entire life,
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I mean, that I just love hearing that. Just you're
Mhm.
in this situation. And I hear these stories before, where it's like we didn't have any money, we didn't know where it was coming from. And then, like you said, this
Right.
random check that you never thought about would come. And then people help take care of you and your kids for Christmas. I mean, that's just the Lord
Yeah.
showing you, I've got you. I've got you.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It's huge. Well, okay, so that happened and then you ended up getting your degree in education, and then we kind of flash forward and you told me 10 years after leaving the marriage that you ended up getting a job in at a domestic violence agency. So I'd love to hear too, like if you could share just kind of how you decided to move towards the agency and leaving education and everything kind of in between there.
Right. So this is an interesting story. And actually, in Indiana, when I graduated in 2005 with my education degree, there was a hiring freeze in Indiana for teachers. So I couldn't get a teaching job. I spent 3 years at my kids. My earbud just fell out.
That's okay.
Yeah, it doesn't like to stay in my left ear for some reason. I spent 3 years as a teacher's aide, because there was a hiring freeze. So literally, I had no child support. I ended up doing tutoring in their after school program to make a little more money, but I was making $13,000 a year with no child support, raising 3 boys. Yeah. So after I went on a mission trip in 2007, I went to Hungary to teach English as a second language in a refugee camp. And when I got back to do my 3rd year of being a teacher's aide, I really had this burning desire to teach people something they needed to know, because it was a matter of life and death, you know? So coming back to snotty little fourth graders, trying to teach them math when they didn't want to be there and I didn't want to be there, was very discouraging, right? So going into should have been my fourth year at the school, my dream job came up. So I applied for it and I went and interviewed. And the principal said, Tina, are you willing to coach the boys' high school basketball team? And I said no. And he said, well, then this interview's over. So that was really, and looking back, it's like that was God saying, I never wanted you to be a teacher in the school system to begin with. So there you go. What are you going to do now? So he started speaking to me about needing me at our local domestic violence agency. And I actually was unemployed 2 years, and then I worked for another year at a thrift store before a job came up at my local domestic violence agency.
Wow.
And the job that came up was a social worker. Okay. And I didn't have a social work degree, but God's like, I need you there. You need to go apply for this job. So I did. I had an interview, great interview, really connected with the executive director there. But a week later, she calls me and said, Tina, we need to have lunch. So we went out and she's like, I can't hire you for this job. I need someone with a social work degree. She's like, however, I need you on my team. And I'm going to use that education degree of yours. And I want you to come work for me. And I want you to create all the domestic violence education programs for our schools, for our police, for, our local Department of Child Services departments, and for our clients. So God knew what he was doing when he sent me to school.
Yes.
We think we know what God has in mind. I heard go to school and added to become a teacher in the local school system, but that is not what he said. So yeah, that's how I got to the agency.
Oh, what a neat story so far. And we haven't even got to where you are now. So we're getting there. This is just, God's hand in your life is it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So something that you also mentioned to me was that when you started working at the domestic violence agency and you're doing the education and you're learning a lot more as well, that you learned that you were, and we already talked about this, but that you were in fact in an abusive marriage and learned that abuse wasn't just physical. Could you share what it was specifically that you learned regarding what an abusive marriage can look like?
Yeah, well, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is. I know.
A domestic violence education program here, but there's so many different types of abuse, right? Verbal and emotional and physical, psychological, sexual, financial abuse. Financial abuse is actually the number one reason why women stay or go back to an abusive marriage.
What does financial abuse look like?
So it can manifest in various ways. Since I had my financial management degree, I actually did all the finances. So I was very aware of what we had financially. He was very irresponsible and would just spend money like it was water and then blame me when checks bounced, for hiding assets and, keeping the wife in the dark about what the assets are. It can manifest in a lot of ways. Yeah. I had a client one time where she got paid from her job on like a debit card. So they didn't get checks. They had this debit card. And so he kept the debit card. Like she had to go to work and then he was using her paycheck to go buy his drugs. So I had to coach her. I'm like, you need to get a new debit card, cancel that one, get a new one, and keep it at your locker at work. You don't have to give it to him. But that psychological and mental abuse makes us think we have to do what we're told. And then once you leave, there's post-separation abuse, there's legal abuse, taking you back to court over and over and over and over, Yeah, there's a lot to it. And I had no idea. When I started creating those programs, I'm like, oh my gosh, he did this to me. He did a lot of these things. And I had no idea.
Wow.
Yeah.
You said too that you were also seeing women lose their children to their abusers, which happened to you as well. Why does this happen, or why was this happening?
Yeah. For most of my clients, it was because their abuser could afford an attorney and she couldn't, you know? So they just get railroad in the court system. And that's legal abuse and financial abuse too, kind of all wrapped into one. Yeah. So when I started seeing that happening, I again started crying out to the Lord, God, this is so wrong. This is not fair. And for 4 solid months, all I heard from him was, what are you going to do about that, Tina? And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do about this, Lord. And people started telling me, Tina, you need to go to law school. And I'm like, I don't want to go to law school. Why would I go to law school? Yeah.
So when you would hear God say, Tina, what are you going to do about it? Was this an audible voice, or was this just as you're praying, you just kept like hearing it in your prayers, or what was that like?
Yeah, I feel like, hearing an audible voice from God is rare. But I really do believe that day I was crying out, wanting my babies back, I really do feel like I heard the audible voice of God saying, I want my babies back too. And the first time that I cried out to God about these women losing their kids to their abusers, I do believe that that was an audible voice from God too. The following 4 months, was it audible every time? No. But it's like the Spirit would bring it back to me every time I thought of it. What are you going to do about that, Tina? What are you going to do about that, Tina? Yeah.
And so you said too that your friends kept saying, Tina, you need to be a lawyer. Why did they say, like, why law specifically, and as opposed to like, Tina, you need to be a social worker because you're doing this education?
Right. So interestingly enough, I had a part-time gig this whole time, where I did bookkeeping. I was utilizing my financial management degree and doing bookkeeping for a law firm, in one of my local towns. So I got really close to one of the attorneys. So I had a relationship with him. And then, yeah, he was a mentor for me. And he's the one that actually spoke it over me first. Tina, you need to go to law school. Because I was sharing with him, things about my frustrations with the court system and stuff. So he's like, you need to go to law school. So
Okay, so he says you need to go to law school, Tina, and you've been praying, crying out to God, and God is saying you need to do something. You need to do something. So at some point you say, okay, I'm going to do law school, but you're 45, and this thought of, but I'm 45. I'm too old, or I'm too, I can't become a lawyer at 50 or, whatever
right.
age. What negative beliefs about age did you have to overcome in order to pursue this degree?
Okay, so that's a really great question. And I want to tell you the paradigm shift for me before I circle back, because I'm too old to go to law school. I don't want to do this. I'm 45. I'm going to be 50 before I graduate and then start a firm. No, I'm too old. Right. But I had so many other excuses for God too. Like I don't have any money. I don't have any time. I don't have all the things you can think of to make an excuse not to do it. For 4 months, I was doing that. Okay. And so one day I had a conversation with my mom. Now, my mom is not a Christian, and, we don't have the greatest relationship. So I know when God speaks through my mother, he's serious. Okay. So I'm on the phone and she's telling me you need to go to law school, right? So I'm like, Mom, I'm 45 years old. In 5 years, I'm going to turn 50. And she's like, Tina, in 5 years, you're going to turn 50. Do you want to do it with a law degree or without one?
Ooh,
Right?
that's a good question.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I mean, we age, we get older every day, and it's like, we're going to turn 50, we're going to turn 55 and 60 and 65. Do you want to turn those ages not having accomplished anything? That's the real question. I mean, we always use age as an excuse, and that's exactly what it is. It's an excuse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, okay,
Yeah.
so you had this paradigm shift. So at what point did you have it right before you applied to law school? Or, I mean, I guess maybe you did in order to apply?
Yeah. Yeah. So as soon as she said that, like something shifted in my brain and it's like, okay, God, I hear you. Let's do it. So I knew where I needed to go. There was really only one option for me because across the river in Kentucky, there's a law school that has a part-time evening program. So I knew that was where I needed to be because I had a full-time job, and I'm raising kids. So my kids were older. They did not need as much, hands-on like they did my first round in school. Don't know that I could have done it, with them being little and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like, next day, it was like, all right, what do I have to do? So I went and found out what to do and did it. But again, it was like, God, you're going to have to get me in. You're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to get me through it. And he did.
When you told your kids that you were going to obtain a law degree or start going to law school, what was the
Yeah.
response like from them?
So I have 3 boys. I feel like boys and girls are way different. I'm glad I didn't have girls, but that's a story for another time. But I feel like they're just, they're not as emotionally tied to things like girls are, I think. So they were just kind of like cool and went on with their lives. My middle son was getting ready to go off to college himself, and my youngest son was in high school. So it was, they had their own lives going on.
Yeah.
And it didn't
Yeah.
really impact them very much.
So to kind of financially get through law school, was it like how before where it was financial aid and like God providing in that way? Or were there additional streams of money income coming in that you were just like, how did like a random check or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So graduate degree student loans. So I have huge student loan debt, but I'm also believing God's just going to take care of that, because I haven't had to make a payment in the last 5 years, right? Because of the pandemic. I haven't been making payments all this time. But okay, so this is interesting. I was working at the agency, right, full time and going to law school at night. Plus, I had my little part time bookkeeping gig on the side. When I got to my 3rd year of law school, because it was a 4-year program since it was at night. When I got to my 3rd year, I was like, I can't do this anymore. God, I need a job where I can literally sit and study all day long and get paid for it. I'm like, that's what I need. And we think that's crazy, but you know what? He did it because the law firm I was doing the bookkeeping for lost their receptionist. So I actually left the agency, got hired to be their receptionist, got paid $17 an hour to sit at the front desk and study all day. Plus, it put me, right in front of attorneys and, dealing with the court system and dealing with clients and stuff too. So, I mean, if that wasn't God, I don't know what is,
Right. Yeah. Hey, More Than Your Age listeners, I'm putting a pause on the episode because I wanted to share something I created that I'd love for you to take a look at. If you've known me, you know I love creating goals, and more specifically, goals for milestone birthdays, and even more specifically, a 30 by 30 or 40 by 40 list, and so on. People ask me all the time to share ideas for what they can do on their list, or they just want to hear what I did on my list. And so I decided to compile a list of over 200 plus ideas on big and small things, and even medium things that you can do for your next big birthday, or really any birthday, or a goal you want to achieve. I'm calling it the More Than Your Age Dream List. Whether it's for a milestone birthday or something you want to achieve personally is all up to you. Head over to morethanyourage.com and download the free guide. When you accomplish your goal, or just decide to document it, tag me at More Than Your Age so I can root you on and encourage you as well. I can't wait to see what you do. Now, back to the show. Yeah, it was just kind of another on-the-job training in a way of where I would assume you probably would have been able to ask a lot of questions and you're seeing what's going on and can apply it to what you're learning in your books as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. So when you were in school, because it was an evening program, were you with people around the same age or did you still have a lot of people that were significantly young?
No, it was all older people. I would say that the 20-somethings were actually the minority in the evening program. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So that's also good to hear. It's good to hear too for other people that it's, it's not as rare as we may think that you can still obtain that there are options for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the world has changed so much. Our grandparents and even some of our parents, they were in a career and they spent their entire career there. And after 40 years or whatever, they retired. It's just not like that anymore, So I think a lot of people, further on in maturity are going back to school,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's great to be able to do that. Okay, so you're in school, you're working, you got the job as a receptionist at the law firm, and then you finally graduate at 50, and it's a huge accomplishment. I need to say congratulations, because that's huge.
Thank you.
I mean, just thinking of where you came from and then everything all the work you had to do, single mom, raising your kids. I mean, just everything that's a lot to have to go through, because you could have easily just played the victim card, in the midst of all of it. And so when you graduated, because you were already working at a law firm, did you just kind of maneuver into their place, or did you know that you wanted to start Purpose Law Firm immediately?
Yeah. So my mentor, right? He tended to represent men in divorce cases, and he actually represented some of the abusers from my previous clients at the agency. So I knew if I stayed there, I was not going to be able to represent the women that I wanted to be able to represent, because he'd probably be on the other side of the table, and that would be conflicts, right? So, and I really felt like God was calling me to open my own firm. So on May 5th of 2020, I filed my business LLCs for both of my businesses, hung my shingle, and started my own firm the same day I got sworn in.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Tina, you're amazing.
Yeah. And then literally, like, my first 5 clients, my mentor was on the other side of the table. So that was just confirmation that I had made the right move,
Absolutely. How did you get your first clients?
Word of mouth. I have not had to do a single second of marketing for family law clients. You know how crazy this world is, and I mean, and we were in the pandemic, so I don't know if you know this, but like domestic violence homicides skyrocketed 200% during the pandemic.
I mean, I guess you could kind of see,
Yeah, because people were home trapped together. Yeah. So the divorce rate went up too, and it was like, I mean, other attorneys were calling me, or I would get clients, because the nice thing is everybody in the community knew me because I was the receptionist at this law firm, right? Yeah. So I've done zero marketing for family law. Yeah. I mean, my phone just rings. And mostly it's other attorneys referring, and honestly still is, Yeah. So, or clients will refer other clients to me. So, yeah, but I mean, the economy has not impacted the need for family law attorneys, that's for sure.
Yeah. So it is very unfortunate. But it's good to have people like you to be able to protect the vulnerable ones. So your firm offers estate planning services, family law, like you mentioned, mediation services, and a division that focuses on providing services to educate, equip, and encourage those who can't afford an attorney. I'd really love to hear more about this specific division, and then really anything else you
Yeah.
want to share about your firm as well.
Yeah. So I just totally redid my website. And I don't know, I had a weekend with the Lord and he was just giving me download after download, right? So this pro se division, so pro se means that you are representing yourself, right? And I just feel like it's kind of an epidemic here because a lot of people can't afford an attorney. And I see the judges cringing, when I'm in court with my client and the other party doesn't have an attorney. I can just see them cringing. And I'm like, how do we solve this problem, God? And so he kind of gave me this pro se program to just for a minimal cost. I'm going to just give them some online classes, and just full disclosure, this program is not built yet. I'm just casting the vision on my website, but it says, coming soon. But I just see, just how to fill out the paperwork and get it filed. I mean, people need to know this, So yeah. So I'm going to create that. I do have the Pursue with Purpose to help victims of domestic violence get a full comprehensive screen for domestic violence. And then I have my Attorneys Who Pray program too, which is all built out, just not running, but it's kind of a mastermind for Christian attorneys because there's not a whole lot of us out there, right? So it's one thing to be an attorney. It's another thing to be a Christian attorney and really trying to align how you practice law with, God's model, because that is not how the world runs. So just having somebody to talk to and be accountable to and kind of brainstorm, how do we handle these situations? So that's my mastermind. Yeah.
That's
So
wonderful. I'll put your website too in the show notes so people can go to that and check more information out as well. So you also wrote a book that came out this past March, Power After DV, which is domestic violence, freedom from the effects of domestic violence. And I'm going to read just a little bit about it and then also want you to just share a little bit more. So the book includes frequently overlooked types of abuse, which we discussed, such as financial abuse, spiritual abuse, legal abuse, and more, by providing a distinctive blend of biblical insights, human stories, definitions of abuse, and useful strategies. So please just share a little bit more, Tina, about kind of what that is. What are the distinctive blend of biblical insights that your book provides?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I have to go back to the pandemic because, I opened my law firm, but when the pandemic first hit, I was waiting for my bar scores. Okay, so I actually was not working at the time and I was waiting for my bar scores, and then the pandemic hit. Right. And I had signed up for Pedro Adeo's 414 challenge. I don't know if you're familiar or not. So it was for such a time as this, out of the book of Esther, right? And he did a 30-day intensive challenge and just kind of laid out all the things business related, and how to start a business, which came at the perfect time, right? And it was in one of those lessons that God gave me the download to create a course called Freedom After the Effects of Domestic Violence. And it was during that time that I created an online course. And I knew then that God's like, at some point, you're going to write the book to go with this. But right now, I want you to get this course set up and launched and all the things. So back to the May 5th, 2019, I opened both my 2020, I opened both my businesses, Purpose Law Firm and Purpose Courses. I launched them both on the same day. So then it was last October, God said, you know what, Tina, it's time to write that book. So I actually had all the content for the book in the class, right? It was just a matter of sitting down and organizing it and putting it in. But yeah, it was also during that time that he gave me that. There's two tools we use in the book. One is the 4-square activity, and then there's the 4-step framework to freedom. Power actually stands for Powerful Overcoming Women Engaging in Restoration. Okay, so this book is all about recognizing what domestic violence is, kind of looking back at your life and your different relationships, because not just intimate partners, but people growing up, your parents, your friends, teachers, but then also looking at maybe how you've been abusive to other people. Because I know for me, my husband was mean to me. And then in turn, I was kind of mean to my kids. Right? So we need to take responsibility for our own actions, So, and then the 4-step framework to freedom, which step 1 is what power is all about, and that's repentance and forgiveness. So we do a whole lot of repentance and forgiveness in this first course in this book. So yeah, I go through 10 different types of abuse, and then each chapter kind of lays out what the target of the enemy is. I really believe, like with each type of abuse, there's a specific target that the enemy uses for that type of abuse. Just for a quick example, he uses emotional abuse to target our heart and our feelings. And with psychological abuse, he targets our mind and our thoughts. So, and it's a great tool for the enemy. Keep women, and of course, men get abused too. I'm not discounting that. This book does focus on women, but it's a brilliant tool to keep women trapped and never, ever, ever accomplish their purpose in life. And that is dangerous.
Yeah, that is. And this, your book sounds very educational, which I know is from your courses, and just extremely informative of just things on what to do. And I thank you for sharing the biblical insights that you also provide. Because I really think, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but just based in spheres that I'm involved in, it's really easy to not even think about the enemy and what he's doing and what he's accomplishing, and that's his intent, right? This is, it's not me. I'm working behind the scenes, and you are not giving me any type of credit. Okay, so I'm going to keep working, and it's just going to lead to destruction. So I love that that's a part of your book.
Yeah. So and I also share my journey. Like I don't give the complete play-by-play. I just, in each chapter for that type of abuse, I give some examples of what I went through. And then each chapter we turn to the word of the Lord and see what the Lord has to say. And then I have a workbook that goes along with it too.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I will put that resource as well in the show notes in case somebody's listening is in a situation and they need your resource. That would be really helpful. Well, Tina, you have done so much. Really, you've done so much and experienced a lot. And the work that appears to be too hard at an older age was done after 50, which I love it. I love it. I love it. And as you're talking to, I'm just thinking it's so easy for women to just sit there and think, I can't do this, my age. And really, when just hearing you and your story too, when you really seek after the Lord and let him guide you, it's his timing is what matters and what's important. And so I've really been inspired by your story already. And so
Thank you.
I know you're going to inspire so many more. And so, as I've mentioned to many women, they really worry about their age. They feel like it's too late to try the things that they want. And so my last question for you is the question that I ask everyone, and I can't wait to hear your answer. And so if you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or goal based on her age or life circumstance, what would you tell her?
This is such a good question. And I feel like, going back to what my mom said, at 45, I don't want to go to law school. I'm too old. In 5 years, I'm going to turn 50. She's like, in 5 years, you're going to turn 50. Do you want to do it with a law degree or without one? Ask yourself that. If I'm too old and whatever's going through your mind, again, it's an excuse. So, and I think, God put us on this earth to accomplish things. And if we're not accomplishing those things, we're not fulfilling our purpose and destiny. And that's a scary thought. And I feel like, that's all he wants from us. He wants a relationship with us, and he wants us to be in relationship with him and letting him lead us and guide us. The second thing I would point out is I'm not sure. I've read through the Bible quite a few times. I don't think retirement is in there. I don't think if it's even in there, I mean, all the disciples, they were working for kingdom advancement till the day they died. Right? So it's not too late. The only time it's too late is when you're dead. So it is literally never too late to do anything.
Love it. Wonderful. Wonderfully said, Tina. Thank you so much. Well, Tina, would you just share with the listeners where they can find you and learn more about your resources and your book?
Yeah. So my law firm is purpose-lawfirm.com. That's my website. So I'm only licensed in Indiana. So if you're not in Indiana, I can't represent you. And then for my Purpose Courses business, I have purposeafterdv.com. So that is where you will find my book. I have a whole purpose pyramid that I'm eventually building. And again, it's vision casting on my website. There is a power page where you can actually get the link to get it on Amazon and the workbook too. And then I do have free resources right now on that power page. So there's a Proverbs 26:2 bundle that's free that talks all about verbal abuse. So I really think that's where it starts. And then I do have a 12-week free session for women to come into also. And then I have a podcast too called Purpose After Domestic Violence. So you can find that on Spotify and all the places where you get your podcasts. Podbean is where I have mine hosted. So Podbean and Spotify for sure. Yeah, so exciting things. And that was another thing. God's like, start a podcast, Tina. Okay. You just have to, and I've learned obedience through all this, right? Like when God speaks and you really feel like he's telling you, just do it. Just do it. Because he's going to get you through. He is faithful.
Yep, he will. Absolutely. Well, Tina Keller, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast. I loved it.
Thank you.
If you were encouraged by today's episode, like and subscribe to this podcast and share this episode with a friend. You can find me on Instagram at More Than Your Age and visit the More Than Your Age Facebook page. Keep striving for your goals, live fully, and we'll catch you next time on the More Than Your Age podcast.